The sound of sirens cut through the summer heat as I stood in my own driveway, completely stunned. Two police officers approached with hands near their belts, eyes moving cautiously between me and the screaming woman on my front lawn. My heart pounded against my ribs as neighbors emerged from their homes, phones recording the unbelievable scene unfolding on our quiet suburban street. Karen pointed at me with a shaking finger, tears streaming down her reddened face as she shouted accusations that made no sense. He promised us the pool. He took money from families. These children have nowhere to go now, she screamed, gesturing toward her teenage daughter who stood mortified behind her. I struggled to find words as the officers asked for my side of the story. How could I possibly explain that this woman had called emergency services because I refused to let her host a party in my private backyard pool? A pool that was mine, that I had never promised to anyone, and certainly had never taken money for. That was the moment I realized just how dangerous entitlement could be. The summer had started so perfectly. After 5 years of saving every extra penny I earned, I had finally been able to install a modest but beautiful pool in my backyard. It was not large or extravagant by any means, but it was mine. A 16 by 32-foot rectangle of shimmering blue water surrounded by simple concrete decking and a few comfortable lounge chairs. At night, the small LED lights around the perimeter created a peaceful glow that reflected off the water surface. It was exactly what I had dreamed of during those years of overtime shifts and strict budgeting. I have always been a private person. My home is my sanctuary, especially after long days working at the accounting firm, where phones ring constantly and fluorescent lights hum overhead without mercy. The backyard pool became my personal oasis, a place where I could float on my back and watch clouds drift across the sky without interruption. Sometimes I would stay there until the stars appeared, enjoying the rare silence of our usually busy neighborhood. My neighborhood is a collection of middle-class homes built in the early 2000s. Most of the residents have lived here for many years, and we maintain a friendly but respectful distance. We wave when passing each other's driveways and occasionally chat about weather or local news, but everyone seems to understand the unspoken boundaries of suburban life. That polite distance made the neighborhood feel safe and comfortable, at least until 6 months ago when the Peterson family moved out and someone new took their place. The first time I met Karen was during my evening swim. I heard a voice call over my fence, and I looked up to see a woman with highlighted blonde hair and oversized sunglasses peering over the top of the wooden barrier between our properties. She was smiling widely, waving as if we were old friends rather than complete strangers. "Hello there, neighbor. What a gorgeous pool you have," she called out, her voice carrying across my backyard. I swam to the edge nearest the fence and nodded politely, somewhat uncomfortable with being watched during my private time. "Thank you," I replied, treading water. "I just had it installed this spring." Karen leaned further over the fence, her smile never wavaging. "I am Karen Wilson. My family and I just moved in next door. We had a community pool at our old neighborhood. I miss having access to a pool so much, especially during these hot summer months." Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I dismissed it as my own tendency toward privacy. I introduced myself and welcomed her to the neighborhood before explaining that I needed to finish my swim and get ready for dinner. She lingered for a moment too long before finally waving goodbye and disappearing from view. Over the next few weeks, Karen seemed to develop an unusual interest in my pool schedule. I would emerge from my back door to find her conveniently working in her garden near our shared fence. She always had questions about the pool. How deep was it? Was it difficult to maintain? Was the water heated? Did I use it often? Each conversation, inevitably drifted toward comments about how her teenage daughter was on the swim team at her previous school, or how they used to host wonderful pool parties for their friends. You know, having a pool is such a responsibility, Karen said one evening as I skimmed leaves from the water surface. So much work for just one person to enjoy alone. I nodded noncommittally. It is some work, but I find the maintenance relaxing. She laughed as if I had said something hilarious. Well, you know what they say. A joy shared is a joy doubled. My daughter Maddie turns 16 next month. She has been so disappointed about moving away from our old house with the community pool access. My stomach tightened as I realized where the conversation was heading. Karen leaned against the fence, her expression suddenly serious. Would you consider letting us host her birthday party here? Just a small gathering of her closest friends. We would take full responsibility for everything, of course. I was caught off guard by the directness of her request. This was a person I barely knew asking to bring a group of teenagers into my private space. I took a deep breath and tried to decline as politely as possible. I am sorry, but I am not comfortable with that arrangement. The pool is not set up for parties or large groups, and there are liability concerns I would rather not take on. The change in Karen was immediate and disturbing. Her smile remained fixed in place, but it no longer reached her eyes, which had turned cold and calculating behind her designer sunglasses. Oh, I see. Well, perhaps another time when you are feeling more neighborly. She turned and walked away without another word, her back rigid with what I could only interpret as offense. That night, as I floated in my peaceful pool under the emerging stars, I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. A boundary had been tested, and my refusal had triggered something unpredictable. What I did not realize then was that this simple interaction was just the first ripple in what would become a tidal wave of entitlement crashing directly toward my quiet life. 3 days after declining Karen's pool party request, I noticed a distinct change in her behavior. When we passed each other at the community mailboxes, her friendly greeting was replaced with a cold nod. This did not particularly bother me, as I had always preferred keeping to myself anyway. What did concern me, however, was overhearing her conversation with another neighbor while I was unloading groceries from my car. "It is such a shame," Karen was saying in a voice just loud enough to carry across the driveways. "Some people have such wonderful resources but are too selfish to share with the community. That pool sits empty most of the time while families with children have nowhere to cool off during this heat wave." The other neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who had lived across the street from me for over a decade, looked uncomfortable. "Well, private property is private property. People work hard for what they have." Karen laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "I suppose some people value things over relationships, not how I was raised, but to each their own." My cheeks burned with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation as I quickly gathered my grocery bags and headed inside. The encounter left me feeling as though I had done something wrong by maintaining my own boundaries. The situation became stranger when Mr. Reeves, another longtime neighbor, stopped by my house the following weekend. He seemed hesitant as he stood on my front porch, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Hey there," he began awkwardly. "I was just wondering. Karen mentioned you might be allowing neighbors to use your pool this summer. Something about scheduled times or a sign-up sheet." I stared at him in confusion. No, there must be some misunderstanding. I have not offered my pool for community use. Mr. Reeves nodded quickly. "That is what I figured. She was telling everyone at the neighborhood watch meeting that you had promised to let her daughter have a sweet 16 pool party, but then suddenly changed your mind. Seemed odd to me since you have always been private about your property. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Karen was spreading misinformation about me throughout the neighborhood. For what purpose? To pressure me through social obligation, to paint me as the villain if I continued to refuse. Over the next week, I learned more about Karen through conversations with neighbors who had taken her measure more accurately than I initially had. She and her family had moved from an upscale neighborhood across town where they had lived in a much larger house. According to local gossip, financial difficulties had forced them to downsize, but Karen seemed determined to maintain appearances at any cost. Their current home, while perfectly nice, was noticeably more modest than their previous residence. From what I gathered, Karen had been quite popular in her former social circle, known for hosting elaborate parties and events. The loss of status seemed to be something she was unwilling to accept, and apparently my backyard pool had become the solution to her social dilemma. My concerns were confirmed when I returned home from work one afternoon to find Karen waiting near my driveway. Gone was any pretense of neighborly warmth. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her expression was tense with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk about the pool situation," she announced without greeting. "Maddie's birthday is in 2 weeks. I have already sent out invitations. Everyone is expecting a pool party." I stood in shock, my work bag still slung over my shoulder. "Excuse me, I clearly told you I was not comfortable hosting a party in my backyard." Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I understand you like your privacy, but this is important to my daughter, to our family. We had to leave so much behind when we moved here. Is it really so much to ask for one afternoon? Just a few hours of your precious alone time?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm on those last words. I tried to remain calm. "Karen, I am sorry about your situation, but I never agreed to this. You cannot send out invitations for an event at my house without my permission." Her facade cracked completely then. "Do you have any idea how difficult things have been for us? For my daughter? Do you know what it is like to lose everything familiar and have to start over? All I am asking for is one small kindness to help my child adjust, and you are too selfish to even consider it." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the rising voices. Karen seemed to notice our audience and seized the opportunity. "Everyone here knows what kind of person refuses to help a teenager celebrate her 16th birthday," she announced loudly. "You will regret being so selfish, I promise you that." With that final threat hanging in the humid summer air, she turned and stormed back to her house, leaving me standing stunned in my driveway as curious eyes watched from windows and porches up and down the street. That night, I double-checked that my backyard gate was securely locked, an action that would have seemed paranoid just weeks before but now felt necessary. Something told me that Karen was not finished testing the boundaries of my property or my patience. The morning of Maddie's 16th birthday arrived with unusual activity next door. I woke to the sounds of car doors slamming and excited teenage voices. Peeking through my blinds, I watched as delivery vans pulled up to Karen's house one after another. A party rental company unloaded folding tables and chairs. A bakery van delivered what appeared to be an elaborate tiered cake. Colorful balloons bobbed against the clear blue sky as they were tied to the mailbox and front porch. My stomach twisted with anxiety as I observed the scale of preparations. Despite my clear refusal, all signs pointed to Karen proceeding as if her pool party plan was still in effect. I spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, unable to relax as the sounds of celebration preparations filtered over the fence that separated our properties. Around noon, I heard teenage girls squealing with excitement next door. Music began playing, and the distinctive sound of gift wrap tearing was followed by appreciative exclamations. I paced my living room, wondering if I had misjudged the situation. Perhaps Karen had made alternative arrangements after all, and the party would remain contained to her own property. That hope was shattered at exactly 1:30 p.m. when my doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I opened the door to find Karen standing on my porch with a group of about 15 teenagers gathered behind her. Maddie, whom I recognized from occasional glimpses, stood at her mother's side looking uncomfortably between her mother and me. Most disturbingly, all of them were dressed in swimwear, beach towels draped over shoulders and pool floats clutched in hands. Karen wore a triumphant smile that sent a chill down my spine despite the summer heat. "We are ready for the pool now," she announced as if this had all been prearranged. I stood frozen in the doorway, momentarily speechless. "I am sorry." "What?" Karen's smile never wavered as she gestured toward her daughter. "The pool party. For Maddie's sweet 16. Everyone is ready to swim now." Maddie shifted uncomfortably beside her mother. "Mom, you said you had permission," she whispered, her cheeks reddening with embarrassment. "I did speak with him about it, honey. He knows all about it." Karen's voice remained confident, but her eyes held a challenge as she stared directly at me. "We would not want to disappoint all your friends who came specifically for a pool party, would we?" The teenagers behind them exchanged uncertain glances, clearly sensing the tension. One girl whispered something to another, and several took small steps backward from my porch. I took a deep breath, determined to handle the situation as calmly as possible. "Karen, as I told you several weeks ago, I am not comfortable hosting a pool party. I never gave permission for this, and I am sorry if you told people otherwise." Karen's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Perhaps you have forgotten our arrangement. We discussed this thoroughly." She turned slightly toward the teenagers. "You all wait here while we sort out this little misunderstanding." The manipulation was both obvious and effective. By bringing the teenagers to my door, already dressed for swimming and clearly excited for the promised pool, Karen had created a situation where I would appear to be the villain no matter what I did. To refuse now meant personally disappointing a group of teenagers on a birthday celebration. Maddie looked up at her mother with growing suspicion. "Did he actually say yes, Mom? Because you told me everything was all set, that you had taken care of all the details." Karen's composure slipped momentarily. "Maddie, not now. The adults are handling this." I felt genuine sympathy for the teenager, who was clearly beginning to realize her mother had built her birthday celebration around a lie. "I am very sorry, Maddie. I never gave permission for a pool party here. I would not have misled you about something so important, especially on your birthday." The girl's eyes filled with tears as the full reality of the situation became clear to her. Her friends shuffled awkwardly, some beginning to move back toward Karen's yard. The birthday girl looked up at her mother with a mixture of hurt and dawning comprehension. "You promised, Mom. You promised this would be the best Sweet 16 ever. You said everything was arranged." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Did you lie to me? Again?" That single word, "again," spoke volumes about their relationship dynamics. Karen's facade cracked as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. "He is the one letting you down, not me," Karen insisted, her voice rising as she pointed an accusing finger at me. "He agreed, and now he is backing out at the last minute." One of the teenage boys in the group cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just go to the community center pool instead. My mom could drive some of us." Maddie nodded gratefully toward her friend, visibly fighting back tears. Yeah, let us just go. This is too embarrassing. As the teenagers began to retreat down my driveway, Karen's expression transformed from confident manipulation to barely contained rage. She leaned closer to me, her voice low but intense. You have just ruined my daughter's most important birthday. I will make sure you regret this. The entire neighborhood will know what kind of person you truly are. With that threat hanging between us, she turned and followed the retreating teenagers, already beginning to loudly lament to anyone within earshot about how I had cruelly changed my mind at the last minute and destroyed a child's special day. I closed my door with shaking hands, my heart racing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Through my window, I watched as the disappointed teenagers gathered on Karen's lawn, many already texting on their phones, likely arranging alternative plans. Maddie stood apart from the group, arms crossed protectively across her middle, refusing to look at her mother who was gesturing dramatically while speaking to some of the teens' parents who had arrived to investigate the commotion. The confrontation had ended, but something in Karen's final threat told me this was far from over. I had the distinct feeling that the worst was yet to come, and I was right. What happened next would escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. Less than 30 minutes after the teenagers departed from my property, most of them piling into parents' cars headed presumably toward the community center pool, I was attempting to calm my nerves with a cup of tea in my kitchen. The unexpected confrontation had left me shaken, my hands still trembling slightly as I lifted the mug to my lips. The relative quiet felt deceptive, like the strange stillness before a severe storm. That stillness was shattered by the sound of my front gate banging open. I moved quickly to my living room window and pulled back the curtain to see Karen marching up my front path alone, her entire body rigid with fury. Her designer sunglasses were pushed up on her head, revealing eyes reddened either from tears or rage, possibly both. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside to meet her before she could pound on my door. Karen, I think you should go home and calm down, I said firmly, trying to keep my voice even despite my racing heart. She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, pointing a trembling finger at me. Do you have any idea what you have done? The parents are demanding refunds. My daughter is humiliated. Her birthday is completely ruined. I frowned in confusion. Refunds? What refunds? Karen's laugh was brittle and sharp. For the pool party, obviously. $20 per child for pool access and refreshments. Do you think these events happen for free? The realization hit me like a physical blow. You charged people money to use my pool, without my permission. It was going to be a surprise thank you. I was going to give you a portion, she shouted, her story changing yet again. All you had to do was be a decent neighbor for one afternoon. My shock quickly transformed into anger. That is absolutely unacceptable. You cannot sell access to my private property. You need to leave right now, or I will call the police. That was when Karen pulled out her phone, her hands shaking with rage. No, I am calling them. You promised access to my daughter and her friends. You took money from families under false pretenses. I stared at her in disbelief. I did no such thing. You are the one who collected money for something you had no right to offer. Karen jabbed at her phone screen with a manicured finger, her other hand gesturing wildly toward my backyard. Hello? Yes, I need police assistance immediately. My neighbor promised to allow children to use his pool for a birthday party. He collected money from multiple families, and now he is refusing to let them in. Yes, that is right. He is holding his pool hostage and endangered children who have nowhere to go in this heat. I quickly pulled out my own phone and began recording her bizarre performance. She was now packing my front lawn, dramatically recounting a fictional version of events to the emergency dispatcher. According to her fabricated story, I had personally collected payments from parents, had signed agreements to host the party, and was now endangering minors by breaking a binding contract. The children are overheating in this 95-degree weather. Some have medical conditions. This is an emergency. She insisted into the phone, actual tears now streaming down her face. Her acting was remarkably convincing, her distress appearing genuine despite being built entirely on lies. By this point, neighbors had begun emerging from their houses, drawn by the shouting. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street approached cautiously, concern evident on her face. "Is everything all right? Should I call someone?" "I have already called the police," Karen announced triumphantly before I could respond. "They will sort this out. He cannot get away with endangering children and committing fraud." I held up my phone to indicate I was recording. Karen is upset because I would not allow her to host a pool party in my backyard. I never agreed to any party, never collected any money, and never made any promises. She is the one who apparently charged people for access to my private property without my knowledge or consent. Other neighbors had gathered at a safe distance, watching the unfolding drama with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed fascination. Karen continued her performance, now addressing the growing audience directly. "He promised my daughter, ask anyone. He told everyone at the neighborhood meeting he would host her sweet 16. Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion, though I knew it was entirely manufactured. "My poor child is devastated." The surreal quality of the moment was difficult to process. Standing on my own front lawn, watching a near stranger fabricate an elaborate narrative portraying me as a villain, while neighbors I had lived alongside for years observed with uncertain expressions. The disconnect between reality and Karen's version of events was so profound that it briefly made me question my own recollection. Had I somehow given her reason to believe I had agreed to her request? That moment of doubt vanished when Mr. Reeves stepped forward from the gathering crowd. "Now hold on. I specifically asked him about this pool access thing last week, and he told me he never offered any such thing. Karen, you told us at the Neighborhood Watch meeting that he had promised the pool for today. Sounds like you might have been counting your chickens before they hatched." Karen's performance faltered only momentarily before she doubled down. "He changed his mind. We had an agreement. Ask my daughter." "Your daughter seemed just as surprised as anyone when he said no," observed another neighbor who had witnessed the earlier confrontation with the teenagers. "She asked you if you had actually gotten permission." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the heated exchange. Karen straightened her posture, wiping tears from her cheeks and adjusting her hair as if preparing for an important appearance. The calculated nature of her behavior sent chills down my spine. This was someone capable of manufacturing not just lies, but an entire alternate reality in which she was the victim rather than the aggressor. As the police cruiser pulled up to the curb, I felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. While I had done nothing wrong, being the subject of a police response in front of my entire neighborhood was humiliating. Yet I was also grateful that objective third parties would now hear both sides of this increasingly bizarre situation. What I could not have predicted was just how drastically the police involvement would change the trajectory of this conflict, or how completely Karen had underestimated the consequences of her actions. Two officers emerged from the patrol car, their expressions professionally neutral as they surveyed the scene before them. A woman in visible distress, a man holding a phone in recording position, and a semicircle of neighbors maintaining a cautious distance. The taller officer approached first, while his partner hung back slightly, hand resting casually near his belt as a precautionary measure. "Afternoon, folks. I am Officer Brennan. We received a call about an unsafe situation involving children and a swimming pool." His tone was questioning as his gaze moved between Karen and me. Karen immediately stepped forward, composing her features into a mask of maternal concern. "Yes, officer. I am Karen Wilson. This man promised to allow my daughter and her friends to use his pool for her 16th birthday party today. He collected $20 from each family for pool access and refreshments. When the children arrived ready to swim, he refused to let them in, despite our prior arrangement and the payments he received." Officer Brennan nodded professionally, taking notes. "And you are, sir?" he asked, turning toward me. "My name is Michael Taylor. I own this house and the pool in question. I never made any agreement to host a pool party, never collected any money from anyone, and clearly told Ms. Wilson weeks ago that I was not comfortable allowing a large group of teenagers to use my private pool." I held up my phone. "I have been recording our interaction since she arrived on my property making these false accusations." The second officer stepped forward. "I am Officer Reynolds. Mind if we separate you two to get your statements individually? Sir, perhaps you could speak with me over by your porch, and ma'am, you can talk with Officer Brennan by the patrol car." Karen nodded eagerly, clearly believing the police would take her side once she had the opportunity to present her case without my interruptions. As I walked with Officer Reynolds toward my front steps, I could hear Karen launching into an even more elaborate version of her fabricated story, complete with specific dates and detailed arrangements that had never occurred. "Can I see your recording?" Officer Reynolds asked once we were out of earshot. I nodded and played the video showing Karen's performance on my lawn, her 911 call, and the neighbor's interventions questioning her claims. The officer watched attentively, his expression revealing nothing. "Have you had previous issues with Ms. Wilson?" he asked when the video ended. "She moved in next door about 6 months ago. She has been increasingly interested in using my pool since the weather got warmer. I declined her request to host her daughter's birthday party several weeks ago, and she has been spreading misinformation about me to neighbors ever since, claiming I had promised access to my pool." Officer Reynolds nodded. "Do you have any text messages or other documentation of your interactions?" I scrolled through my phone and showed him the only text exchange Karen and I had ever had, a brief introduction when she first moved in with no mention of pool access or arrangements of any kind. Our conversations about the pool were all in person, over the fence, or in the driveway. But several neighbors witnessed me declining her requests, and her daughter seemed genuinely surprised today when her mother claimed I had agreed to the party. The officer made notes in his small notepad. "And to be clear, you never received any payment from Ms. Wilson or any other parents for pool access?" "Absolutely not. The first I heard about money changing hands was today when she came back after the teenagers left. She admitted to charging $20 per child but claimed it was going to be a surprise thank you, and that she was planning to give me a portion." Across the lawn, I could see Karen gesturing emphatically to Officer Brennan, occasionally pointing toward my backyard or directly at me. Her performance was impressively committed, complete with dabbing at tears with a tissue she had produced from her pocket. After several more questions about the timeline of events, Officer Reynolds thanked me and rejoined his partner. They conferred quietly for a few moments before approaching Karen again. I could not hear their conversation, but Karen's body language shifted from confident to defensive. She began shaking her head vigorously, her voice rising again. Of course I do not have it in writing. It was a verbal agreement between neighbors. Ask my daughter, she will confirm everything. Officer Brennan said something that caused Karen to fall momentarily silent. She then pulled out her phone and appeared to be making a call, turning away slightly for privacy. Within minutes, a car pulled up to the curb, and a man I presumed to be Karen's husband stepped out, looking confused and concerned. Shortly after, another car arrived containing Maddie and what appeared to be one of her friend's parents. The officers asked to speak with each of them separately. I remained on my porch, acutely aware of the neighbors still watching from a distance. Mrs. Jenkins approached and sat beside me on the steps. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she said quietly. "We all know you keep to yourself. Nobody believed for a second that you suddenly decided to turn your backyard into a community pool." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you, this whole situation is surreal." From my position, I could see Maddie speaking with Officer Reynolds, her body language suggesting discomfort and embarrassment. She kept glancing at her mother, who was now engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with her husband. After about 20 minutes of interviews, the officers gathered Karen, her husband, and Maddie for a final conversation. Karen's voice rose several times, but her husband placed a restraining hand on her arm each time, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation. Finally, Officer Brennan approached my porch, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Mr. Taylor, we have spoken with everyone involved, including Ms. Wilson's daughter. This appears to be a civil matter regarding access to private property. You have every legal right to deny anyone access to your pool, regardless of what Ms. Wilson may have told others." "What about her false report to emergency services?" I asked. The officer nodded. "We have addressed that with Ms. Wilson. Making false reports is a serious offense. In this case, we have issued her a warning, but should this behavior continue, there could be more severe consequences. Her daughter confirmed that she was never told explicitly that you had given permission, only that her mother had taken care of everything, and that the pool party was all arranged." I glanced over at Karen, who was now standing with arms crossed tightly over her chest, her husband speaking to her in what appeared to be firm but quiet tones. "We have advised Ms. Wilson that she is not to enter your property again without explicit invitation, and that any further false claims about agreements or financial transactions that did not occur could result in charges of harassment or filing false reports," Officer Brennan continued. "Does that address your concerns for now?" I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and lingering discomfort about the entire situation. "Yes, thank you, officer." As the police prepared to leave, I overheard Officer Reynolds speaking clearly to Karen, his voice carrying intentionally. "Ma'am, I want to be absolutely clear. Emergency services are for genuine emergencies. Being denied access to a neighbor's private swimming pool is not an emergency. Filing false reports can result in fines or even criminal charges if the behavior continues." Karen's face had lost its theatrical distress, replaced with a tight, angry expression as the reality of her situation became clear. The police intervention had not gone according to her plan at all. Rather than forcing me to open my pool to her daughter's party, she had instead been publicly exposed and officially warned. As the police cruiser pulled away, the gathering of neighbors slowly dispersed, many of them giving me sympathetic nods or small waves. Karen, her husband, and Maddie returned to their home without another word, though Karen's rigid posture and clenched fists suggested the matter was far from resolved in her mind. That evening, I sat alone by my pool, the water reflecting the sunset in ripples of orange and pink. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the chaos of the day. While I felt vindicated by the outcome of the police visit, I could not shake the uneasy feeling that this conflict had fundamentally changed my relationship with my home and neighborhood. The private sanctuary I had created for myself had become the center of public spectacle and neighborhood gossip. As darkness fell over the still water, I wondered what ripple effects would follow from this bizarre confrontation. By Monday morning, news of Saturday's pool party fiasco and police intervention had spread throughout our neighborhood like wildfire. As I left for work, I noticed several neighbors watching from their windows or pausing their yard work to observe me. Unlike the suspicious or uncertain looks from the day before, their expressions now held something closer to fascination or even sympathy. Mrs. Jenkins waved me over as I backed out of my driveway. "Michael, I just wanted to check if you are doing all right after that whole mess on Saturday." I forced a smile, uncomfortable with my new status as the subject of neighborhood interest. "I am fine, thank you. Just hopping things calm down now." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Well, you should know that Karen has been busy on social media all weekend, posting about neighborhood bullies and selfish people who endanger children during heat waves. She is not naming names, but everyone knows who she means." My stomach tightened at this news. While I had been vindicated in person during the police intervention, Karen was now taking her fabricated narrative online, where I had no opportunity to defend myself. "There is more," Mrs. Jenkins continued. "The Richardsons from 3 houses down came by yesterday. Apparently, they paid Karen $40 for their twins to attend the pool party. She told them the extra money was for premium seating by the deep end of your pool. They want their money back and she is refusing." I shook my head in disbelief. Premium seating. She charged extra for specific spots around my pool. Not just that. Jenny Morrison said Karen collected additional fees for diving board access and private cabana reservations. You do not even have those things, do you? "No, it is just a standard rectangular pool with concrete decking and a few lounge chairs," I replied, increasingly amazed at the elaborate fantasy Karen had constructed and sold to unsuspecting parents. Throughout the day at work, I received several text messages from neighbors I barely knew, sharing information about Karen's escalating attempts to control the narrative. According to these reports, she had created a private social media group called Community Pool Access Advocacy, where she portrayed herself as a crusader fighting against selfish resource hoarding in neighborhoods. That evening, my doorbell rang just as I was changing out of my work clothes. I opened the door to find a middle-aged couple I recognized from neighborhood gatherings, but had never spoken with directly. "Hi, I am David Morrison, and this is my wife Jenny. Our daughter was supposed to attend Maddie's birthday pool party on Saturday. We paid $60 for her and 2 friends to attend." I invited them in, somewhat reluctantly, and listened as they explained how Karen had approached them at church the previous Sunday, describing an elaborate community arrangement where I had agreed to open my pool for scheduled events throughout the summer. She had collected varying amounts from different families based on how many children would attend and what premium services they wanted to access. "We feel terrible about this whole situation," Jenny said, looking genuinely embarrassed. "We should have checked with you directly before giving her money. It just seemed so official. She even had printed receipts with pool rules and scheduled time slots." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the extent of Karen's deception. I had no idea she had gone to these lengths. I never authorized any of this. David nodded. We figured that out after hearing about the police being called. Several families are now demanding refunds, but Karen is claiming she cannot return the money because it was spent on non-refundable pool maintenance chemicals and insurance for the event. Over the next few days, a steady stream of neighbors stopped by my house, each with their own story about Karen's elaborate pool access scheme. She had apparently collected over $800 from various families, promising everything from regular weekend access to private swimming lessons allegedly taught by me. The most disturbing part was learning that she had used her daughter's birthday party as just the first of many planned events centered around my pool. By Thursday, community sentiment had shifted dramatically against Karen. Parents who had paid for pool access were now confronting her directly, showing up at her door demanding refunds. Her social media campaign backfired as people began commenting with the truth about the situation. Her attempts to portray herself as the victim crumbled as more details of her deception emerged. While there was a certain satisfaction in witnessing this public accountability, I found no joy in seeing how the situation affected Maddie. I glimpsed her waiting for the school bus one morning, standing alone while other teenagers clustered in small groups nearby, clearly avoiding her. The social fallout for a 16-year-old girl must have been devastating, especially since none of this had been her doing. Karen, however, seemed incapable of accepting responsibility or recognizing the harm she had caused. When confronted by angry parents, she doubled down on her claims that I had verbally agreed to the arrangement and then cruelly backed out. She even suggested starting a petition to force homeowners with pools to provide equitable community access during summer months. Mr. Wilson, Karen's husband, appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Neighbors reported seeing heated arguments between them in their driveway or through open windows. He had apparently been unaware of the money his wife had collected under false pretenses and was now facing the social and potentially legal consequences of her actions. On Friday evening, I was surprised to see a formal letter in my mailbox from the Wilsons. It contained a brief, clearly lawyer-drafted apology for any misunderstandings regarding pool access, along with a statement that no agreements had ever been formalized. While falling short of admitting outright fraud, it was clearly an attempt to protect themselves from potential legal action from the families who had paid for non-existent pool access. That night, as I floated in my once again peaceful pool under the stars, I found myself reflecting on the strange sequence of events. The water that had once been my simple source of relaxation had become the center of neighborhood drama, the focal point of one woman's elaborate deception, and ultimately the catalyst for a community-wide reckoning about entitlement and boundaries. I felt vindicated but hollow. The sanctuary of my backyard had been invaded, not physically but psychologically. Every time I entered my pool now, I was aware of being watched from neighboring windows, of being the subject of continued discussion and gossip. My private space had become uncomfortably public in ways I had never anticipated. It was Wednesday afternoon, almost 2 weeks after the pool party incident, when I heard a soft, hesitant knock at my front door. I was working from home that day, taking advantage of the midweek quiet to catch up on some projects. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Maddie Wilson standing on my porch alone, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Hello, Mr. Taylor," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I would like to speak with you for a few minutes if that is okay." I hesitated briefly, wary of any interaction with the Wilson family after everything that had happened. But the teenager before me looked nothing like her confrontational mother. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her eyes meeting mine only briefly before darting away nervously. "Sure, Maddie, I replied, stepping back to allow her inside. "Would you like some water or lemonade?" She shook her head, perching awkwardly on the edge of my living room sofa. "No, thank you. I cannot stay long. My mom thinks I am at the library studying with a friend." That statement alone spoke volumes about the family dynamics at play. I sat in the armchair across from her, giving her space to say whatever she had come to say. "I wanted to apologize," she began, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her small backpack, "for everything that happened with the pool party and, well, everything my mom did. I had no idea she never actually got your permission. She told me everything was arranged and perfect." I nodded, feeling genuine sympathy for the teenager caught in her mother's web of deception. "It was not your fault, Maddie. You did nothing wrong." She looked up, her eyes suddenly brimming with unexpected insight. "The thing is, this is not the first time something like this has happened. Back in our old neighborhood, my mom was always— I do not know how to explain it exactly. She makes promises she cannot keep. She tells people things that are not true. She acts like she is entitled to things just because she wants them." I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue her surprisingly mature reflection. "When we moved here, I thought things would be different. Our old house was much bigger, with a pool and everything. But then my dad lost his job and we had to downsize. Mom keeps pretending nothing has changed. She keeps trying to live like we used to, even though we cannot afford it anymore." She took a deep breath before continuing. "When she saw your pool, it was like she fixated on it. She kept telling me we would have pool parties just like at our old house, that the neighbors here would love us just as much as everyone did before. I should have known something was wrong when she would not show me any texts or emails from you about the party arrangements." I leaned forward slightly. "Again, none of this was your fault, Maddie. Your mother put you in a very difficult position." "That is why I am here," she said, her voice growing more confident. "I want to make things right at least a little bit. I know I cannot fix everything she did, but—" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I noticed your lawn needs mowing and your garden could use some weeding. I am good at yard work. My grandpa taught me. I was wondering if maybe I could help out around your property once or twice a week. And maybe, if I do a good job for a few weeks, you might consider letting me and just two friends use the pool for an afternoon." The proposal caught me by surprise. This was not at all what I had expected from this conversation. "You want to earn pool access through yard work?" I asked, wanting to make sure I understood correctly. She nodded eagerly. "Just a small gathering, not a party. Just me and my two real friends who stuck by me after all the drama. We would follow any rules you set. I know how to test pool chemicals too. I used to help my dad with our old pool. I could help with that as well." I studied her face, seeing nothing of Karen's entitlement or manipulation. Instead, I saw a teenager who was trying to distance herself from her mother's behavior patterns, who understood the concepts of boundaries and earning privileges in a way her mother clearly did not. After considering for a moment, I nodded. "I think we could arrange something like that. 2 hours of yard work per week for the next 3 weeks. If all goes well, you and two friends can have a supervised afternoon at the pool. Small gathering, not a party. And your mother cannot be involved." The relief and gratitude on her face was immediate and genuine. "Thank you so much, Mr. Taylor. I promise I will do a great job, and I will make sure my friends understand all your rules." What followed over the next 3 weeks was remarkable to witness. Maddie showed up promptly each Saturday morning, working diligently in my yard without complaint. She mowed the lawn with precision, weeded the garden beds carefully, and even took it upon herself to trim the hedges that had become slightly overgrown. When I showed her the basics of pool chemistry testing, she revealed that she already understood the process thoroughly from helping with her family's previous pool. During these Saturday morning sessions, Maddie occasionally shared more about life with Karen. Without explicitly criticizing her mother, her anecdotes painted a picture of a woman desperately clinging to a lifestyle and social status that was no longer financially sustainable, often at the expense of honesty and respect for boundaries. Mom always says it is not what you have, but what people think you have that matters, she told me one morning while skimming leaves from the pool's surface. But I think that is exhausting, always pretending. By the third weekend, Maddie had more than fulfilled her end of our arrangement. My yard looked better than it had in months, and she had proven herself to be responsible and trustworthy around the pool. True to my word, I agreed that she could invite 2 friends over the following Saturday afternoon. The day of the small gathering arrived, and Maddie appeared with 2 other girls who introduced themselves politely and immediately asked about pool rules and boundaries. It was clear that Maddie had prepared them well. The 3 teenagers enjoyed the pool respectfully, keeping noise to a reasonable level and even cleaning up meticulously before they left. As they were preparing to leave, Maddie approached me with a shy smile. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove not everyone in my family is, well, you know. This meant a lot to me." I was about to respond when the sound of a car door slamming interrupted us. Corinne Wilson stood at the end of my driveway, arms crossed and sunglasses pushed up onto her head, her expression thunderous. "Madeline, what do you think you are doing here? I have been calling you for hours," she shouted, marching up the driveway. Maddie's friends quickly gathered their things, clearly uncomfortable with this new development. Maddie herself straightened her posture, a look of resignation crossing her face. "Mom, I told you I was going swimming with Jess and Allie today. I earned it by doing yard work for Mr. Taylor." Corinne's gaze darted between her daughter and me, her face flushing with anger. "Earned it? This is ridiculous. After everything that happened, you have been sneaking around behind my back to work as his gardener, for pool access, when your father and I used to own a pool twice this size." "That is the point, Mom," Maddie said quietly but firmly. "We do not own that pool anymore. This one belongs to Mr. Taylor. I cannot just demand to use it." "Well, if you are allowed to swim here, then surely I should be included in this arrangement," Karen declared, her tone shifting to something more calculating. "After all, I am your mother. I should supervise you swimming." I was about to intervene when Maddie did something that surprised both Karen and me. She stepped forward, placing herself between her mother and me. "No, Mom, that is not how this works. I earned this privilege by respecting Mr. Taylor's property and boundaries. I worked for it. I did not demand it or lie about it or try to manipulate anyone. That is the difference." The simple statement, delivered without anger but with unmistakable clarity, seemed to hit Karen like a physical blow. She stared at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. "Maddie, get in the car. We will discuss this at home," she finally said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I need to help clean up first," Maddie replied calmly. "I gave my word that we would leave everything exactly as we found it." Something shifted in Corinne's expression then, a flicker of recognition or perhaps shame. Without another word, she returned to her car and sat inside, waiting as Maddie and her friends completed their cleanup and said their goodbyes. As Maddie walked toward her mother's car, she turned and gave me a small wave. "See you next Saturday for the regular yard work," she asked hopefully. I nodded, returning her wave. "Looking forward to it. You did an excellent job with the hedges last time." Over the following weeks, A new routine was established. Maddie continued to help with yard work and pool maintenance, earning occasional supervised pool time with her friends. Karen, while never explicitly apologizing to me, began acknowledging me with stiff nods when our paths crossed in the neighborhood. The elaborate social media campaign against me quietly disappeared, and the neighbors reported that she had finally refunded most of the money she had collected under false pretenses. The most significant change, however, was visible in the relationship between Karen and Maddie. Neighbors observed Karen beginning to participate in more age-appropriate activities with her daughter, rather than trying to recreate the lavish social events of their past. Mr. Wilson had apparently insisted on family counseling, a development that seemed to be having a positive effect on their household dynamics. By the end of summer, as the pool season drew to a close, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a simple fence conversation about pool access. What had started as an entitled demand had transformed, unexpectedly, into a valuable lesson for everyone involved about respect, boundaries, and the difference between earning something and feeling entitled to it. On the last warm weekend of the season, I invited Maddie and her parents for a proper, sanctioned pool gathering. Corinne arrived with a store-bought cake and an awkward but seemingly genuine attempt at normal neighborly behavior. As I watched her interact with her daughter by the pool, not dominating or demanding, but actually listening, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected resolutions come not through confrontation, but through example. The neighborhood drama had subsided, my privacy was respected once again, and somewhere in the process, a teenager had found her voice against the tide of entitlement that had threatened to shape her future. My backyard pool had returned to being a place of peace, but it had also become something I never expected. The site of a necessary lesson about boundaries and respect that would ripple outward long after the summer waters had stilled.